New Year's Eve is a night of celebration, full of countdowns, fireworks, resolutions, parties, and for many, questionable dance moves. I wouldn't know, but 45 years before the iconic ball drop in Times Square became an annual thing, New Year's Eve held a radically different meaning inside the churches and homes of enslaved African Americans. This gathering, known as Watch Night, was not just a church service, but it was a solemn vigil that was filled with reflections and prayers. Prayers for change, prayers for freedom. And everything changed when those prayers were answered on the night of December 31st, 1862, when the clock struck midnight and enslaved African Americans in the South were freed forever thanks to the Emancipation Proclamation going into implementation. In this video, we're going to explore that history and how it still echoes inside many churches in the United States to this day. Happy New Year, everyone. My name is David. Welcome to Church Visit number 31 of 52 churches in 52 weeks, round 3. This past Tuesday, I found myself driving out to downtown Minneapolis well past my normal bedtime to ring in 2025. But instead of attending a New Year's Eve type of party, I attended Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church for their first Watch Night service since COVID. Now, if you're like me just a few days ago, you may be wondering, what is a Watch Night service? 2 years ago, when I was doing the second round of 52 churches in 52 weeks, I was in Nashville on New Year's Day, and I had just learned the night before several Nashville churches had held New Year's Eve church services ranging from 10 p.m. to midnight. And I just remember kicking myself wondering, man, that would have been interesting to attend. So this year for the third round, I started doing some Google searching to find an interesting church to attend a New Year's Eve church service. But instead, I kept finding this term of Watch Night, many of them African American churches in the South. And I had never heard of this term before. Many of these pastors were asking the congregation to wear all black for the Watch Night. So curious, I decided to do some more searching on Google, and it immediately, the inner history nerd inside of me, as soon as I learned where this originated from, I had to learn more. I had to witness one of these church services for myself. In the 19th century, New Year's Eve was one of the most dreaded nights of the year for enslaved African Americans. It was a night of deep anxiety, deep fear, because January 1st, the start of the new year, that was Heartbreak Day, and many families would be torn apart. And as a result, to bring some hope, to try and bring some peace, these Watch Night services would give hope. So when December 31st, 1862 happened, Freedom's Eve, instead of the anxiety, instead of the fear, instead of the unknowns, it was a night of hope. It was a night of people gathering together, and as soon as the clock struck midnight, they'd be free. And this powerful tradition, this remains in many churches across the country. And Watch Night, it remains this church service of reflection, of prayer, and of gratitude. So I was eager to experience this Watch Night service firsthand for myself. So I joined the congregation at Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church. This was an absolutely amazing congregation. And the evening, it was filled with this soul-stirring music, these heartfelt prayers, and these testimonies of various journeys from members of the congregation who talked about their bondage to freedom, which also represented this bondage to freedom, both physical and spiritually. Now, I should note, typically in my videos, I like to show a little bit what it looked like inside and just give a little bit of a taste of what the church service was like. I spoke with a church official when I arrived, and I was advised to not record or take any type of pictures inside. So to be respectful, I didn't do anything like that. So instead, to get creative with this part of the video, I'm just going to include some illustrations from watch nights in the 19th century to the tune of some of the choir music. And then I'll be back in just a few moments to share the rich legacy of watch nights and just a little bit of a recap from what I took away from this amazing church service. The origins of the watch night service is a bit of a wild ride. If you want to go way back, you could say that its roots are traced back as far as Moses and the Israelites in Exodus, because in Exodus chapter 40, verse 1, God commands Moses to set up the tabernacle of the tent on the first day of the first month. And this moment occurred at a rather interesting time because the Israelites had been delivered out of slavery, out of Egypt, and were now wandering in the wilderness. So with this tabernacle, it symbolized God's presence among his people. It was a new beginning. It was a transition period from slavery to freedom, from wilderness to divine purpose. And this theme of deliverance, this was so strong, especially among enslaved African Americans. I don't need to be a history teacher to tell you that, because this story in Exodus resonated so strongly during their hardships and their hope for what they were trying to get delivered from in the United States. Fast forward centuries later, the idea of watch night formally emerged in the 18th century in about the year 1733. This all started in the Moravian Church in what now is the Czech Republic. So this is a Protestant denomination, still exists today, and the focus is on prayer and communal worship. And oftentimes before the watch night service, the congregation would have what was called a love feast, basically just a communal meal for the night. So over time, this practice was adopted by John Wesley. He was the founder of the Methodist Church, one of the largest Protestant denominations in the world today. And John Wesley, he was very strong on covenant renewal. So he advised his congregations to have watch night services to be stronger in prayer and feel the Spirit stronger. So they often these Methodist churches would have watch nights several times during the year. And eventually over the years, it was condensed to just New Year's Eve. Now, I don't know about you, but as I was researching this, my head was like, okay, how do you take this watch night tradition that was founded in the Czech Republic, became popular in England? How did this become such a tradition in the Deep South in the United States during the slave era, and especially with how this had such a monumental impact with the Emancipation Proclamation. Well, when the Methodist Church was spreading to the United States in the 18th century during the Great Awakening, watch night services traveled with it. So the Methodist Church, it emphasized personal faith, emotional expression, and revival style type of worship. So making watch night, it was a natural fit in this church tradition. So as the Methodist Church and their circuit riders would ride around the country to preach the gospel, they would go to the southern United States, and oftentimes with African Americans who were enslaved, that's when some of these Methodist preachers and circuit riders would invite them into listening to their preaching and would become active participants. So out of this tradition arose the African Methodist Episcopal Church that was founded in 1816 by Richard Allen in the Philadelphia area. So the AME Church, this became one of the very first independent Black denominations in America. So this offered both to free and enslaved African Americans a spiritual home where race and restrictions did not matter. So watch night services became an annual tradition inside these AME type of churches, and it became deeply symbolic because it was blending the traditions of the Methodist Church and then combining that with African American culture and resilience. Looking into this, there is just so much complexity because with watch night, again, these are taken from European church traditions, and then to have that merge into the enslaved African American community, these watch nights, like they were full of prayer, worship, dancing, singing, but also there was, again, that fear, that anxiety, because the very next day, January 1st, the start of the new year, that was Heartbreak Day. That's when many families could be split apart. So with watch nights, with African Americans who were enslaved, they were under constant surveillance, even in practicing their faith. So white enslavers, they feared that religion, on one point, it was to their benefit with control and power, because they could use religion to kind of keep people the way that they wanted. But on the other hand, they feared that with a large church gathering, it could do the exact opposite and instead create some type of insurrection. So they would write laws that would restrict gatherings. One 1848 Georgia slave code wrote that no person of color could preach, and that any type of religious exercise that contained colored people could not exceed more than 7 people. So many of these gatherings then, having been forbidden because you can't have more than 7 people there, oftentimes enslaved African Americans would hold services in what was called invisible churches or hush houses. Here they were able to continue with their faith, but they were risking their lives to doing so. There were prayers for liberation, these whispers of hope. And as the Civil War raged on and Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in September of 1862, it all set up one of the most significant watch nights ever on December 31st, 1862, when Freedom's Eve, everything changed when slavery was officially abolished in the United States. With the Emancipation Proclamation in full effect, watch nights transitioned from a night of anxious anticipation to one of more celebration and remembrance. So even though freedom had been proclaimed, the struggle for true equality had just begun. So in the years following emancipation, African American communities continued to hold watch night services as a way to honor ancestors' resilience and sacrifices. So the services became these annual traditions moments to reflect on progress, to renew faith, and just look ahead with a sense of hope. So during the civil rights movement, watch night services, they served as spaces for organizing, spaces for reflection, and also community empowerment. So leaders drew on the rich legacy of Freedom's Eve to inspire courage and the persistence in the face of injustice. I want to touch on just a few notes from what I was finding online regarding watch night services. It seems like many churches start at 7 p.m. Often that includes a dinner. But then no matter what, it seems like every church will start their watch night at 10 p.m. and go at least 2 hours up until midnight. I also saw several pastors, and I mentioned this earlier, were requesting the congregation to wear all black as a sign of unity. So I wore this for this particular service that I went to in Minneapolis, though that was not a requirement at this particular service. Also, something that I read, and I don't recall hearing this from the service that I attended, but I've seen and read that other congregations, they will chant out and bow in prayer. They'll say, "Watchman, watchman, please tell me the hour of the night." And then the minister will reply, "It is 3 minutes to midnight." And then 2 minutes will pass, and then he'll say, "It is 1 minute before the new year." And then when the clock strikes midnight, "It is now midnight. Freedom has come." And then that will be a blessing and a transition into the new year. So for the service that I attended, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of everything. The service, I got there at about 10 o'clock at night, probably one of the latest services I've ever attended. And it lasted 2 hours. And there was times when, obviously I was struggling because it was way past my bedtime to stay awake. But then immediately I woke up because I just really, really enjoyed the gospel choir here. It had to be about 50 people or so. And then just surrounded by you is this energy and this passion and this spirit. And it's just all praise. And there was one moment I remember too, early on, there was a greeting. So typically at many churches I go to, you just shake the hand of the person to your right. You shake the hand of the person to your left, maybe the people behind you. But here, this was a social engagement. This lasted at least 5 minutes. Everyone got out of their chair and just kind of walked all over the place. Can't say enough good things about this congregation and just how they let me in just so richly. I just really, really appreciate that. So that really took a while. The pastor would get up at various times and, he would just touch on some inspiring messages between the gospel hymns and songs that were going on. But I think the highlight from this service that I attended was the testimonies. And they had 3 different segments featuring a couple and then 2 individual speakers as well. So the very first couple that got up, the gentleman is just talking about all the hardships that he's faced this year. He had a death in the family, and then not too long after that, his house burned down. But yet despite that, he talked about just knowing that God was there throughout the entire process for him. Another gentleman got up. He actually was from the worship team, and he was talking about, some of the difficulties that he had in the court system. And obviously, for him to be doing what he was doing up on stage, it is just immense dedication for the instruments and the music that he was playing. And he had it. He had this presidential pardon. And he even said from President Biden that helped him just remove all the obstacles. And he thanked God to be able to just be free from that past and all the burdens that he was dealing with. To end the service, the pastor got up and he delivered an inspiring sermon. You could tell from the congregation, they really had his back because he was confident, he had swagger, And he was also very charismatic in just the way that he preached with such a deep tonality to his voice. This was all a setup for the final part of the evening because he called the congregation up for an altar call in a moment of prayer. And this prayer lasted up until the clock striking midnight for the new year. So overall, with this watch night, I found this to be a bridge between the past and the future. And a couple words that came to mind was this was a night of remembrance, this was a night of reflection, but this was also a night of renewal for your spirits for this whole church community. And I talked about earlier in this video with Moses and the Israelites with this transition period, going from slavery and bondage to freedom, from going from the wilderness to divine purpose. And with this night, I took away like this moment where this was the transition period, removing last year, moving to the new year. And there was a part of me where it's like this, I do kind of wish more churches did this, but not so much in a New Year's Eve type of service, where you have confetti and it looks like Times Square, but more of just a deep, deep spiritual reflection within your own spiritual life. Thank you for joining me into this look into watch night services, and also a thank you to Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church in Minneapolis for the warm welcome. I have several other church visits in the hopper, especially as I play with this new background. A couple interesting church visits is a Norwegian Viking stave church in South Dakota, a dog chapel in Vermont, and what many have said is the ugliest church in the United States. So if you want to stay tuned for that, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit notifications for when any future visits drop. But until next time, Happy New Year, everyone.